course, it's deeply ironic that they would cover that book of Christian history with human skin taken from a murder victim.
Genocide was what happened to my ancestors, and especially the man that was murdered for this book.
It was time for us to tell the truth about this book.
The Lenape way of life was one of understanding that not only do we as the humans have a living spirit, but that all of creation has a living spirit. The animals, the fish in the sea, the mountains, the rocks, the water, the cosmos, all of that has a spirit. The spirit endures beyond just the physical life. When your physical body is over with, you die in that way. But your spirit continues on in a journey. The murdered Lenape man in the 18th century, whose skin was flayed from his body and turned into a cover of a book. A book then that was put on display at this very institution. All the while, that skin still had the spiritual remains.
I think that man's spirit got caught between this physical world and the spiritual world. He couldn't get to the spiritual world because part of him was put on that book. Part of his spirit stayed there and was stuck there.
Of course, it's deeply ironic that they would cover that book of Christian history with human skin taken from a murder victim that they had murdered an Indian. But they didn't see it that way. I'm Tink Tinker. I'm a citizen of the Wajaji Utseli, or Osage Nation. I came here 37 years ago to teach at Iliff School of Theology, and I'm an emeritus professor from Iliff. In about 1986, shortly after I arrived, I came in '85, one of my colleagues pulled me aside and said, "Nobody will talk to you about this, but you need to know that this happened at Iliff." And he told me the story as he knew it. And I almost left because it is so disturbing to an American Indian. Instead of leaving, I waited till everybody was in church on Sunday, because they're Christians, right? And I went back in the building and I smudged every nook and cranny I could. The book was published in 1759. The book is a history of Christianity, written in Latin, but was given this horrendous new cover after a murder in 1779.
What I understand of the history of the book is that a squatter named David Morgan, many generations ago in the 1700s, was taking over land that was actually Lenape land.
And it was David Morgan, a squatter farmer in Western Virginia, now West Virginia, decided for whatever reason to kill an Indian that was walking across what he thought was his farm, his property.
He had his skin flayed so that it could be some sort of a trophy or a treasure. And then somehow this book on the history of Christianity came along, and there was some decision made that it was a great idea to bind the book in the skin of this Lenape victim. The book was, held by the Morgan family, and it evidently was enough of a treasure that it was kind of showed around and, bragged about. And so the book was passed from David Morgan, as I understand the history, to a friend of his, Dr. William Barnes.
Well, this book was so important as a trophy, as a sacred relic of triumph over Indians. Never mind that it was murder. Barnes kept it with him through 40 years of ministry in the Ohio Valley until 1890, when he decided to move to Colorado. Barnes decides to give this treasure to the new school, and they kept it under display for 81 years. Iliff kept this treasure as a holy relic, a triumphant trophy of Christian triumph over Indian peoples and Indian lands. That's how it got there.
In the 19th century, in the late 1800s, even before that, you know, we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have the ability to be precise in our history and being able to nail down every fact of a story. What we do know is that the book moved across the country in some way. We do know that it ended up at Iliff School of Theology. We do know it was a human skin from a Lenape man that covered the book. Those are the things that we know, and we can trace the facts even more precisely after the book arrives at Iliff.
The school was founded in 1892. Iliff School of Theology is a progressive theological school. It is affiliated with the United Methodist Church. We are expected to be very inclusive. Our student body reflects many different faith traditions, some 30 different traditions. I'm Thomas Wolfe. I'm the president and CEO of Iliff School of Theology. I learned about the book long before I came to Iliff. I learned about the book in 1996. The General Conference of the United Methodist Church happened to be held in Denver. A word was spreading across the floor of the General Conference because there was a knowledge that there was some book at Iliff with the skin of a Native American person as its cover. Just the idea of a book covered with the skin of a Native American person was profoundly disturbing. You don't have to be affiliated with the school to feel that. It's part of a long history of violation of Native peoples in this country. When I first was named president, I was presented with a file marked confidential. And I looked through that file, and it was collections of newspaper articles, a little card, which even described what the cover was about.
This inscription was written in 1893. Since the event happened in 1779, it's 114 years after the event.
So the book was continued to be on display, and that is how it became known and into the awareness of students who were passing by that display case. And of course, then we start having the civil rights movement.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't clearly state that it was students at Iliff who raised the issue. I guess the students called the American Indian movement, who didn't know about this book at all, as they went through the process of trying to convince the president of Iliff back then to do something about returning that cover to Indian people. The American Indian movement came and got the cover of the book in 1974. But Iliff, in its infinite Christian-loving wisdom, swore aim to a non-disclosure agreement, a written NDA, that they couldn't talk about it. And Jemison Jones, the president at Iliff, insisted on a non-disclosure agreement in order to protect Iliff in terms of its fundraising potential. That's immoral and unethical. But he did it. Christians have two words for it that we don't have in any Indian language. It was evil and it was sinful.
So the book cover was taken, and then the book was locked up in a safe, and nothing more was said about it.
So that secret that was established in 1974, that was my first outward-facing responsibility when I became president of ILIF. It was time for us to tell the truth about this book.
Cutting the cover off the book then doesn't remove entirely the spirit of that Lenape murder victim from the book itself. And something needs to happen to that book. But ILIF shouldn't do anything without talking to Lenape people. So we had a long-range plan to bring in a delegation of Lenape elders to counsel ILIF. One, to fully release the spirit of that murder victim, that Lenape man, we need to do something about the book. But I couldn't just let ILIF off the hook thinking this was an oops moment and we made it right now by getting rid of the book. I really wanted to change the behavior of my white relatives, change the understanding of my white relatives.
To try to change these institutions, it doesn't happen overnight. But it's a start. We start with ILIF and then we just keep trying to do that everywhere we go, whatever the institution might be. My name is Curtis Zuniga. In the language of the Lenape, I am called Alushi Oquist, which means he is like a fox. And among my people, I am a chief in the Lenape Nation. I was contacted by Dr. George Tinker, Tink, to identify some Lenape elders who could speak with knowledge of having been part of our respective communities.
Well, honestly, didn't hear about the book until Curtis Zuniga sent me the articles on it. My reaction to it, well, yeah, it was a reaction. It was disgust and sadness and heartache and all of that kind of emotionality. And then it was like, okay, I have more purpose now because I have to work with whoever's involved in this to bring the truth out to our Lenape communities and the world.
Our big question is, what do we do with the book? And the understanding was we are preparing ourselves to be guided. We had several meetings to prepare for this, involving staff here and Curtis representing the other Lenape delegates. And the Lenape delegates came from a wide array of places because the original Lenape lands was the Hudson Valley, north from New York City up into Canada.
It's important that ILIF School at least listen to us and try to take steps in a new and better direction, because they bear the responsibility of not only accepting this book in the year 1893, knowing that the tanned skin of a murdered Lenape Indian man was a part of it, which to me is still antithetical to some Christian teachings in the Bible. And it's important that ILIF recognizes that they became complicit in the colonial domination and the racism against what Thomas Jefferson called in the Declaration of Independence. He called us merciless savages.
The book represents Christianity, the history of Christianity, but it represents the domination and conquest of people, the domination and conquest of land, grandmother, the domination and conquest of grandfather, the water, and eventually the domination and conquest of air itself.
Tink suggested, why don't we meet privately and talk amongst ourselves? So we met at the Four Winds American Indian Center in Denver. They were wonderful hosts and allowed us to meet privately and have this discussion that framed our intention and purpose and gave us an opportunity to put together a statement called the Statement of Guidance and Direction to ILIF. We know the story about this book, and the school wants to hear from us, well, what should we do with it? To be able to say they have counseled with elders who are descendants of the individual who had been murdered and whose skin was part of that book. But what I'm going to do in all of my conversation for the remainder of today and tomorrow and Saturday is to recognize this as a teachable moment.
We decided a list of insistencies, demands, conditions, however you want to describe it, of what we want ILIF to do to bring some kind of dramatic change to how this book was hidden as a secret and at one point was seen as the trophy of the university, and its contradiction to Christianity and Lenape people.
We set up the room as they requested in concentric circles, and the inner circle would be the people who predominantly be invited to speak or represent the school in one way or another. This is what we've been building toward. This is a relationship that's going to be in the future of ILIF's history and future.
First of all, with a circle, there's no head person. We're all equals here, and we're going to take time, and everyone in this circle is going to have something to say.
Friday, the delegation comes, and I asked the question, do you want to see the book? They all decided they wanted to see it. And so into my office we went. A few pages of the margin, there's some freehand Greek writing. They looked at the book. They saw it for the representation of domination, of empire building, that it was meant to be. And then they talked amongst each other, and then somebody lit something that could be smoked and smoked the book.
I think during the course of this afternoon's discussion, we're going to really examine more of the contents of the book as a microcosm of the larger story of the Europeans who brought an attitude of colonialism and domination to what we call Turtle Island, our homeland.
One of the things that I felt was really important for us to do was to talk about how we are building this into the institution so that it will not be dependent on any one personality or any one person's particular belief that this is a good thing to do, but rather this is going to be a commitment that this generation is making for this institution going forward in time. 100 years from now, what is ILIF going to be doing, and how is it going to be understanding this situation? What is it going to be teaching about Christian dominance against Native American people?
I'm going to read a statement of guidance and direction. As the delegation of Lenape elders, we are calling on ILIF School of Theology to develop funds and resources to accomplish the following.
Commit to a permanent relationship with Lenape elders.
Established an endowed professorship with job descriptions by Lenape elders.
Add a required curriculum course to educate all ILIF theology students in a clear understanding of the papal bulls and the doctrine of discovery and domination.
To create a memorial and/or a traveling display, also available on the internet, featuring passages of the book with audio recordings read by ILIF theology students.
an interpretative center to educate Indians and non-Indians on the truths of American history as it pertains to the indigenous nations and people of Turtle Island.
And finally, at such time as it is requested, the Lenape elders will then take possession of this book, but the sense of response and commitment from Iliff will then inform and frame our attitude about taking possession of this book and making things right by that ancestor back in the 18th century.
We can't use the word reconciliation because there's been no conciliation. I would affirm that we start anew, but not without also remembering and holding in tension the history that led to this moment. They're trusting us, and we want to be in relationship, and that means we share information of what's going on about these recommendations and guidelines that they have presented to us and that we have accepted formally. And so what the rhythm of that's going to be, we look forward to discovering as well.
Genocide was what happened to my ancestors, and especially the man that was murdered for this book. So the history of Christianity and all of its awful atrocities that were the domination of a culture and many cultures around the world needs to be told as the truth, as the honest and sincere, disgusting truth.
How could they not see that's inappropriate, that killing an Indian is not an act of brotherly love? Except for Christians, it seems to have been because they coveted the land. Never mind the Ten Commandments and thou shalt not covet. They coveted the land, Indian land, and needed to get rid of Indians as efficiently as possible. You can push them west, or you can simply murder them.
The book represents to me not just one institution's lack of understanding, but it represents to me the whole nature of Christian domination that displaced and murdered millions of Native people. We can't engage the whole of that history, but it's in this story completely. And so if you can change the people around you, that will go into the world with a new mindset and awareness about this, that's what we're doing.
I think the bigger story is about power, and it is about, might I say, white power, Euro-Christian power, the power of the power of having a commitment that your particular worldview and your particular insistence that the world works one way, that it's all kind of embodied in that book. When I taught classes on worldview, I would teach about the Euro-Christian worldview as being, a hierarchical triangle. And of course, it's anthropocentric, the humans at the top, and all of, creation is given to us for our flourishing. And there's another worldview, which is we're all related. This is, everything is my relative. I think the book represents the clash of those worldviews, but also the very violent and vicious and very disordered imposition of one worldview over another. Like your skin is something I can extract and I can use it for this thing, this commodity, this object.
On this side of that little garden area, there's a maple tree. When I go outside, sometimes I'll walk over to that tree and greet the tree and touch it, because that's my relative. The lilac bush out here is my relative. The bunnies dropping their poop all over the sidewalk, those are my relatives. They're not below me in some hierarchy of humans at the top, animals, and lesser things to the dirt and rocks themselves. Rocks, those are our oldest ancestors. Even fire is a relative. That's what I really want, is for people to begin to think about the world in terms of a different worldview. I want to encourage that. Changing a worldview has to happen for a whole social unit, and it happens over a lifetime. But it doesn't happen until people start thinking a different way. That's what I want for Ilif and for all of my Euro-Christian relatives.